It was a chilly evening when she stepped onto her small porch, sipping the last bit of her tea. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, but the cold wind reminded her that autumn was already here. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her and noticed a figure near the edge of her driveway. At first she thought it was just someone passing by, but as she looked closer, she realized it was a man. He was sitting on the curb, hunched over and shivering despite the jacket he wore. Something about him felt different from the usual people who walked by her street. There was a quiet dignity in his posture, even though he looked tired and worn out. She hesitated for a moment. She had always been the kind of person to notice others, but she rarely acted beyond small gestures like giving spare change to someone who asked. This man, however, seemed different. There was a story behind his eyes, a depth that made her heart tighten. She set her cup down and went closer, trying not to startle him. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. The man looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were sharp and clear, yet filled with exhaustion. He nodded slowly. "Just tired," he said, his voice low but calm. "I haven't had a warm place to rest in a while." Her heart went out to him. She didn't know why, but she felt an immediate urge to help. She glanced back at her house and then at him. "You can stay in my garage for the night," she offered without thinking too much. "It's warm and you can rest." He seemed surprised, maybe even a little hesitant, but then a small smile appeared on his face. "Thank you," he said simply. She led him to the garage, which was attached to her home but had been converted into a makeshift storage space and small workshop. There was room for a cot, and she quickly pulled a blanket from a shelf and laid it down. She offered him some water and a small snack she had grabbed from the kitchen. He accepted politely, his hands shaking slightly as he took them. As he settled onto the cot, she noticed the worn edges of his shoes and the dirt under his fingernails. He looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. She felt a pang of sadness but also a sense of connection, as if their meeting had a purpose she couldn't yet understand. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said softly. "Just rest." He shook his head gently. "It's okay. I like talking. It helps keep my mind calm." So she sat nearby on an old chair she had dragged into the garage and listened. He told her bits and pieces of his life, careful not to reveal too much. He spoke of losing a job, of wandering from place to place, of nights spent under the stars. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet resilience that made her respect him even more. She found herself sharing too, talking about her day, her small worries, and the little joys she found in life. It felt natural, like two strangers who had been meant to meet. The conversation was gentle, filled with pauses and laughter at small things. She noticed how thoughtful he was, how carefully he chose his words, and how he seemed to observe the world in a way that was both wise and patient. Hours passed quickly. Outside, the wind howled and the sky darkened, but inside the garage there was a sense of calm and safety. She offered him another blanket when she noticed him shivering slightly, and he thanked her with a nod that seemed to carry more gratitude than words could express. At one point, she asked him why he was out here alone. He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "Sometimes life takes turns we don't expect," he said finally. "I've made mistakes, lost things I cared about, and ended up here. But tonight, this is the first time in a long time that I feel at peace." She felt a lump in her throat. There was a story behind his words, a history that she couldn't fully grasp, but she understood the emotion. She reached out and offered him a reassuring smile. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, "even if it's just for tonight." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and appreciation. "It means more than you know," he replied. As the night deepened, the garage grew quieter. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator from the house and the occasional rustle of the blanket. She noticed how he seemed to relax, how the tension in his shoulders eased, and how he finally allowed himself to rest. Watching him, she felt a strange sense of fulfillment, a quiet happiness that came from doing something purely out of kindness. She couldn't help but wonder about his story, about the life he had lived before he ended up here. There were clues in the way he spoke, in the way he carried himself, but she didn't press. Sometimes it was enough to simply be present, to offer warmth and comfort without judgment. Hours later, as the night grew colder, she checked on him one last time before heading back to the house. He was asleep, wrapped in the blanket, looking almost peaceful. She whispered a quiet goodnight, feeling a sense of connection that was hard to explain. Returning to her living room, she sat down with her tea again, now cold but comforting in its familiarity. She thought about the man in her garage, about the small act of kindness that had led to this unexpected encounter. Her mind wandered, imagining where he had been that day, what he had experienced, and what tomorrow might bring for him. She felt a mix of emotions, curiosity, compassion, and a quiet hope that somehow this small gesture had made a difference in his life. She realized that sometimes it didn't take much to impact someone's world, that a single act of generosity could create a ripple far beyond what one could see. As she finally went to bed, she felt a sense of anticipation mixed with contentment. She didn't know who he really was or what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight she had offered safety, warmth, and kindness to someone who needed it, and that, she thought, was enough to make the night feel meaningful. Outside, the wind continued to blow, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the quiet sounds of the neighborhood. In the garage, a man slept peacefully, unaware that the woman who had offered him shelter would soon learn that their encounter was far more extraordinary than either of them could imagine. And for now, that was all that mattered, the simple, human connection between two strangers on an ordinary, chilly evening. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the garage window, casting a soft glow across the room. She woke to the sound of birds chirping outside, the ordinary rhythm of the morning giving a sense of calm after the unusual night. Glancing toward the cot, she saw him still sleeping, his face relaxed in a way that suggested a long, restful night. The blanket was tucked neatly around him, and for a moment she felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing she had helped someone find comfort when they needed it most. She went inside to make a cup of tea, careful not to disturb him. The smell of the brewing tea filled the kitchen, and she took a deep breath, reflecting on the conversation from the night before. There had been something different about him, a presence that felt unusual for someone who appeared homeless. He had stories, yes, but also a kind of composure, a subtle intelligence and a calm confidence that she couldn't quite place. It made her curious, though she didn't ask too many questions. Respecting someone's privacy, after all, was just as important as helping them. Carrying her tea back to the garage, she sat down quietly in the chair next to his cot. He stirred slightly, blinking at the light and the sudden awareness of morning. A small smile formed on his lips when he saw her. "Good morning," she said softly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," he replied, stretching slightly. His voice carried a warmth that made her feel at ease. Yet there was a calm strength in it that was hard to ignore. They shared breakfast together, simple food that she had prepared quickly, toast, eggs, and some fresh fruit. She watched as he ate, noticing the way he appreciated the smallest things, the taste of the food, the warmth of the tea, the quiet morning light. It reminded her that happiness could be found in simple moments, even for someone who had faced hardship. After breakfast, they continued talking. He shared more of his past, speaking in fragments rather than a long, continuous story. He talked about his love for books and learning, his curiosity about the world and the people he had met along the way. She was fascinated by the way he expressed himself, careful with words yet full of meaning. It was as though he had a depth that went beyond appearances, a life lived fully even in the face of loss. She, in turn, shared her own experiences, her challenges, her small triumphs, and the things that mattered most to her. They spoke freely, creating a bond that felt effortless, as though their meeting had been destined. She was struck by his humility, how he could speak of struggles and yet maintain hope, how he could find joy in small things despite the hardships he had endured. At one point, she asked him how he had ended up on the streets. He paused, thoughtful, choosing his words carefully. "Life has a way of changing in an instant," he said. "One day you have everything you think you need, and the next circumstances take it away. Jobs, friends, a home. Things you assume will always be there can disappear, and sometimes you're left to find your own way, to start over in ways you never imagined." She listened intently, feeling a mix of empathy and admiration. It was rare to meet someone who could speak of hardship without bitterness, someone who seemed to have accepted life's unpredictability without losing a sense of self. She realized that he had been through a lot, more than she could possibly imagine, and yet he remained dignified, thoughtful, and kind. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as well. They spoke about favorite books, music, and the simple joys of life, sunsets, walks in nature, and moments of quiet reflection. There was laughter too, small and genuine, as they shared anecdotes and observations about the world. It was easy to forget the harshness of life for a moment, to simply enjoy the presence of another human being, listening and being listened to. As the morning moved into afternoon, she noticed subtle hints that didn't quite match the image of a typical homeless person. The way he held himself, the careful way he handled objects, and the quiet confidence in his speech. All of it suggested a life that had once been very different. She noticed a pen clipped inside his jacket pocket, a pen that looked expensive and a scarf with fine stitching. She didn't comment, though. It didn't seem important. What mattered was that he was here, resting and sharing moments of connection. She found herself thinking about the small choices that led to this encounter. A decision to offer shelter for just one night, a simple act of kindness, had brought this man into her life. She felt a quiet sense of wonder at how unpredictable life could be, how strangers could cross paths and create meaningful experiences out of chance encounters. The man, in turn, seemed to sense her thoughts. "You've been kind," he said suddenly, looking at her with an intensity that made her pause. "Not just tonight, but in how you see the world. Most people don't notice or care. You do. That's rare." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't often that someone recognized her small acts of kindness, and hearing it from him carried a weight she hadn't expected. She nodded, saying quietly, "I just try to do what I can, when I can." They continued their conversation well into the afternoon. She found herself forgetting time, caught up in the exchange of thoughts, stories, and laughter. He asked about her family, her friends, and her dreams. She, in turn, asked him about his passions, the books that had influenced him, and the places he had visited. There was a rhythm to their dialogue, a natural ebb and flow that made it feel like they had known each other far longer than a single night. Despite the warmth and comfort of the garage, she noticed a quiet vulnerability in him that he didn't always show. He spoke of loneliness, of nights spent wondering where he belonged, of moments when he had felt invisible to the world. She listened with empathy, offering words of reassurance and understanding. It was clear that he had faced moments of deep despair, yet he had survived them with a quiet strength that was both humbling and inspiring. As the afternoon wore on, she offered him a chance to rest again before he left. "You don't have to go anywhere yet. You can stay until you're ready." He smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to reach his eyes. "I appreciate that. This has been a rare moment of peace. Thank you for that." She realized then that sometimes it wasn't about solving all of someone's problems or changing their life. Sometimes it was enough to offer comfort, presence, and understanding, to create a space where someone could feel safe and valued, even for a short time. That, she thought, was a gift she could give without expectation. They sat in quiet reflection for a while, simply sharing the space without words. The garage, which had once been just a storage area, had become a place of connection, a temporary sanctuary from the challenges of the outside world. She felt grateful for the experience, for the chance to witness a glimpse of his life and to share parts of her own. There was a sense of intimacy in the simplicity of the moment, a reminder that human connection could be profound in the most unexpected ways. By late afternoon, the sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the garage floor. She could see that he was preparing to leave soon, though he didn't say it aloud. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared respect that didn't require words. She felt a twinge of sadness at the thought of him leaving, but also a sense of fulfillment, knowing she had been able to make a difference, even if just for a night. Before he left, he stood and offered her a hand. She shook it, feeling the strength in his grip and the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you for everything," he said. "You've reminded me that kindness still exists in the world." She smiled, touched by his words. "Take care of yourself. And remember, even small acts of kindness matter." He nodded, and with a final look of gratitude, he stepped out into the fading light. She watched him go, feeling a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Who was this man, really? Where had he come from, and what would become of him? She didn't know the answers, but she knew that their time together had left a lasting impression. As she closed the garage door behind him, she felt a quiet sense of wonder at the unpredictability of life. A single night, a simple act of generosity, had brought a stranger into her life in a way that felt both meaningful and transformative. She realized that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact, and that human connection, even brief, could leave an enduring mark on the heart. The next morning, she woke to the sound of sunlight streaming through her window and the faint hum of traffic outside. The garage felt quieter than usual, almost empty in a way that made her chest tighten slightly. She remembered how he had left the previous day without fanfare, simply walking away as if he had never been there. She had caught only a glimpse of him disappearing down the street, his figure small against the backdrop of the neighborhood, and a strange mix of curiosity and wonder had settled over her. She moved about her morning routine in a quiet daze, making tea and breakfast while glancing periodically at the garage door. The memory of their conversation, his calm presence, and the subtle dignity he carried lingered in her mind. She tried to focus on her day, but thoughts of him kept creeping in. Who was he really? Where had he come from? The questions felt important, though she didn't expect to find answers. Her neighbors walked by with casual greetings, but she felt a sense of separation from the usual rhythm of life. Something about that night had shifted her perception. Small acts of kindness suddenly seemed more meaningful, and ordinary interactions felt richer. She realized that meeting him had opened a window into another world, one that was hidden behind appearances, assumptions, and the routines of everyday life. Days passed, and she returned to her work, chores, and errands, but she couldn't shake the memory of him. She found herself replaying snippets of their conversation, the way he spoke about life's unpredictability, the laughter they shared over small things, and the quiet moments of understanding they had exchanged. It amazed her how one brief encounter could leave such a lasting impression. Then one evening, she received a small, unexpected package at her doorstep. It was plain with no return address. Inside, she found a handwritten note and a small folded piece of cloth. The note read simply, "Thank you for your kindness. I will never forget it." There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it, but the message stirred something in her. She felt a strange mix of curiosity, gratitude, and anticipation. Could it be from him? It seemed likely, and yet the mystery only added to the wonder of their encounter. She held on to the note for hours, turning it over in her hands, reading and rereading the words. It felt like a gentle reminder that even small acts of generosity could leave a profound mark. She thought about the night he stayed in her garage, how she had offered warmth and safety without expecting anything in return, and now she realized kindness could return in ways she hadn't imagined. Life continued in its usual rhythm, but she noticed changes in herself. She became more observant, more empathetic toward people she encountered. When someone asked for directions or needed help with a small task, she offered it without hesitation. When a neighbor's dog wandered into her yard, she took a moment to guide it back. She discovered that the memory of his presence had inspired her to live with greater awareness and generosity. Small acts that made the world feel a little brighter. Weeks passed, and she occasionally wondered about him. Where was he now? What had he been doing since that night? She imagined him walking the streets, seeking moments of peace, or perhaps finding work or sitting quietly in a park, thinking about life. Her mind wandered over possibilities, each more curious than the last. She realized that part of her fascination came from the contrast between his appearance and the hints she had noticed. The expensive-looking pen, the carefully made scarf, the way he spoke and carried himself. Something didn't quite match the story he had told. Something just beneath the surface. One afternoon, she was scrolling through her social media when a post caught her attention. It was about a philanthropist who had been quietly donating to communities in need. Someone who had lived humbly despite enormous wealth. She clicked through, curiosity pulling her deeper into the article. The details, his appearance, his mannerisms, the stories of his generosity, felt eerily familiar. Her heart began to race as she scrolled through the photos. Could it really be him? She stared at the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. The man she had helped, the one who had shared his stories and laughed with her in the garage, could be someone incredibly wealthy. The thought was almost unbelievable. She felt a mixture of disbelief, awe, and a touch of embarrassment. She had treated him as a stranger, a man in need, and yet he had been someone with immense resources. And still he had chosen to reveal only as much as he wished, living with humility and grace. Her mind replayed every detail from that night. The way he had handled objects, the quiet intelligence in his voice, the thoughtful way he had spoken. Now it all made sense. She realized that appearances could be deceiving. The true character was not defined by wealth, status, or possessions. She had learned this lesson in the most unexpected way, and it left her feeling both humbled and inspired. For the next few days, she found herself reflecting on the encounter constantly. She thought about the ripple effect of kindness, the way her small act of offering shelter had not only touched his life, but had also touched hers in ways she could never have predicted. She began to see connections between people and actions, understanding that even brief interactions could hold deep significance. The memory of him lingered like a quiet flame, guiding her perspective on generosity, empathy, and human connection. She decided to take a small walk one evening to clear her mind. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets bathed in golden light from the setting sun. As she walked, she noticed familiar faces of neighbors and strangers alike, and she felt a newfound awareness of the lives around her. People she had once overlooked now seemed more visible, their struggles and joys apparent in subtle ways. She realized that her encounter with him had opened her eyes to the humanity present in everyone, even in brief passing moments. Returning home, she felt a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite name. She kept checking the mailbox, half hoping for another note, another sign from him. The thought of seeing him again or hearing from him in some way filled her with both excitement and uncertainty. Yet she understood that the timing of life's events was unpredictable, and that patience was as important as action. One morning she woke to a knock at her door. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it, half expecting a neighbor, half expecting the unexpected. And there he was, standing there calmly, dressed simply, his presence as composed and dignified as she remembered. He smiled gently, as if he had stepped out of her memory rather than the busy street. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. "I wanted to thank you in person." Her voice caught slightly. "You're not intruding. I've thought about you often. I wondered where you were." He stepped inside, glancing around the house with quiet appreciation. "I wanted to show my gratitude properly," he said. "Not just a note, not just words, but to let you know how meaningful your kindness was." They sat together, sharing tea again, but this time, the conversation had a new depth. He spoke of his life, of the choices he had made, and of the reasons he sometimes lived anonymously, helping others quietly. She listened, fascinated as pieces of his story unfolded, revealing the man behind the humble exterior. She realized that their encounter had not only been significant for him, but for her as well, shaping her understanding of compassion, humility, and the impact of small gestures. Time seemed to stretch, filled with meaningful dialogue, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. She found herself seeing the world through a new lens, appreciating the hidden stories behind every face, the unseen struggles, and the quiet strength in others. She realized that her simple decision to offer shelter had led to a profound lesson in empathy, understanding, and the unpredictable ways human connection could enrich life. Weeks had passed since that quiet evening in the garage, yet her mind could not stop circling back to him. Life moved along, of course, with its usual routine of work, chores, and errands, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. She sometimes wondered whether she had imagined the depth of their connection, or if it had been real, as fleeting and delicate as it seemed. Then, one afternoon, she came across something that made her heart skip a beat. Scrolling through her social media feed, she stumbled upon a post about a philanthropist who had been quietly helping communities across the city. The post spoke about a man who had given generously to local shelters, schools, and underprivileged families, all without seeking recognition. It described someone who had once lived a life of privilege, but now chose to help others in humble ways, often disguising his identity to ensure the focus remained on the impact rather than the donor. Her curiosity grew as she read on, each sentence stirring a strange familiarity. The photos in the post caught her attention immediately. The man pictured, with calm eyes and a thoughtful expression, looked uncannily like the man who had stayed in her garage. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was seeing. Could it really be him? It seemed impossible, yet the resemblance, the demeanor, the quiet intelligence in his gaze, it all matched. Her mind raced through every detail she remembered. The way he had spoken, the care in his movements, the thoughtful pauses in conversation. Now, pieces that had seemed ordinary or inconsequential, the pen tucked in his jacket, the finely stitched scarf, the calm confidence in his voice, suddenly made sense. She felt a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a little embarrassment for not realizing sooner. She had known him only for a night, yet it seemed she had brushed against someone extraordinary without even knowing it. She reread the article multiple times, trying to process the revelation. It described his efforts to remain anonymous in his philanthropy, how he had chosen to live quietly despite immense wealth, and how he believed in connecting personally with those he helped whenever possible. The more she read, the more she felt a deep respect for him. It was one thing to be generous in private, but to maintain humility and discretion took a kind of character that left her quietly inspired. A week later, the phone rang and her heart leapt as she saw an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. A calm, familiar voice spoke on the other end. "Hello," he said softly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice trembled slightly as she responded. "No, not at all. It's good to hear from you." He explained that he had wanted to reach out personally to express his gratitude for her kindness that night in the garage. He shared that her willingness to help, her openness, and her respect had left a lasting impression on him. Hearing his voice, calm and sincere, brought back memories of their conversations, their laughter, and the quiet moments they had shared. She realized that her small act had created a ripple she could never have predicted. They spoke for hours that day, bridging the gap between their worlds with conversation that was honest and thoughtful. He revealed more about himself, his life before he had experienced loss, the choices that had led him to live modestly despite his wealth, and his commitment to helping others in ways that were meaningful and personal. He spoke without boasting, without need for validation, but with clarity and humility that made her feel privileged to hear it. As he shared his experiences, she began to understand the full weight of their encounter. The man she had thought of as a stranger, someone in need of temporary shelter, was in fact someone who had navigated extraordinary challenges and opportunities in life. Yet despite his wealth and resources, he had chosen a path of humility, generosity, and quiet reflection. She felt humbled and inspired, realizing that true character was measured not by appearances or possessions, but by empathy, integrity, and the ability to impact the world positively. During their conversation, she asked questions, not out of curiosity for status or wealth, but out of a genuine desire to understand him as a person. He shared insights into his philosophy, the lessons he had learned through hardship, and the ways he sought to make a difference in the lives of others. She listened intently, captivated not by his wealth but by the depth of his humanity. There was a sincerity in his words, a consistency in his actions, and a quiet wisdom that made her feel she had encountered someone truly extraordinary. Over time, he began to involve her in some of his projects, not as a recipient of charity but as a collaborator. He explained that her kindness, her perspective, and her empathy were valuable, and he wanted to offer opportunities for her to participate in efforts that made a difference. She was amazed and grateful, yet she felt that it was their shared humanity, not his wealth, that had brought them together. The collaboration became a bridge between two worlds, one that allowed her to contribute meaningfully while witnessing the impact of thoughtful generosity firsthand. Their meetings were deliberate and grounded, filled with conversation, planning, and quiet reflection. She noticed that his humility was consistent, that he never flaunted wealth or status, and that his focus was always on people and their needs. The lessons she had learned during their first encounter deepened. Empathy, understanding, and small gestures of kindness could create ripples far beyond what one might imagine. The man she had sheltered for one night had now become a teacher, not in words of instruction, but in the example of how to live with integrity, compassion, and purpose. Through this growing relationship, she began to see life differently. She noticed subtleties in everyday interactions, the small ways people struggled and helped each other. She realized that the world was full of unseen stories, hidden kindness, and moments of grace that often went unnoticed. She became more present, more thoughtful, and more willing to engage with people in meaningful ways. The encounter in the garage had opened a door not just to another person's life, but to a broader understanding of humanity. Weeks turned into months, and their bond strengthened. They shared laughter, ideas, and moments of quiet contemplation. He would sometimes visit her home, and they would spend hours discussing the impact of even minor actions, the importance of humility, and the potential of people to create change. She admired the way he remained grounded despite the enormity of his resources, how he valued people over possessions, and how he approached life with both thoughtfulness and generosity. Then, one day, He shared something that would change her perspective further. He revealed that he had chosen to live modestly, to avoid the distractions of wealth because he wanted to focus on meaningful contributions and human connection. He explained that the night in the garage had reminded him of the importance of personal interaction, of seeing and being seen, of connecting with people without expectation. That simple night had reinforced his belief that kindness was a force more powerful than money, status, or influence. She listened, deeply moved. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the role she had unknowingly played, for the fact that one act of generosity had sparked something profound in his life. She realized that their story was more than just a chance encounter. It was a testament to the power of empathy, trust, and human connection. The lessons of that night had expanded, touching both of their lives in ways that neither could have predicted. From that moment on, she carried the knowledge of their shared experience with her in everything she did. Her interactions with people, her decisions, and her view of the world all shifted subtly but meaningfully. She understood that life's true wealth was not measured in dollars or possessions, but in moments of connection, acts of kindness, and the courage to extend compassion to others. And she knew that the man she had sheltered in her garage, once a stranger, would continue to inspire her for the rest of her life. It had been some time since that first night in the garage, yet the memory remained vivid, like a light that refused to fade. She often thought about him, the man who had walked into her life so quietly and left an imprint that would last forever. She had learned of his true identity, the wealth he carried in a life lived mostly unseen. But what struck her most was how grounded and humble he remained despite it all. The realization that her small act of kindness had been meaningful to someone of such influence still surprised her, yet it also reminded her that human connection was far more valuable than material wealth. One afternoon, she received a letter at her door. There was no hint of extravagance in the envelope, just simple paper with a neatly folded note inside. She opened it carefully and began to read. The handwriting was familiar, calm, and deliberate. "I want to thank you once more for your kindness that night. It meant more than words can describe. Your compassion reminded me of the importance of human connection, and it has stayed with me ever since. I would like to offer you an opportunity to be involved in a project that is very close to my heart. Your insight and perspective would be invaluable." Her heart raced. She couldn't believe it. The man, the stranger she had helped, had now reached out with an offer that could not only help others but also bring her into a world she had never imagined. She felt a mix of excitement, humility, and responsibility. This was not about reward or recognition. It was about making a difference, about using the opportunity to touch lives the way her small act of kindness had touched his. She accepted the invitation, meeting him soon after in a quiet cafe. They talked for hours, planning initiatives, sharing ideas, and finding ways to help people in need. What amazed her was his approach. He was not interested in grandeur or headlines. He wanted to create real, meaningful change that could reach people personally. He spoke of communities that had been overlooked, schools that needed resources, and individuals who had lost hope. She listened, inspired by his dedication and the thoughtfulness of his plans. As the days went on, they visited shelters, community centers, and schools together. She saw the impact of their work firsthand, from children smiling as they received new books to families finding support they had not known was possible. She realized that her life had changed as much as his efforts had changed the lives of others. She saw the world differently now, more aware of the small ways people could help each other and the importance of empathy and understanding. In quiet moments, they would talk about the night she had first offered him shelter. He spoke about how it reminded him of the essence of humanity, of how even a single act of generosity could ripple through time in ways one could never predict. He told her that her simple gesture had inspired him to reconnect with the personal side of his philanthropy, to see beyond numbers and figures and remember the faces of the people who truly mattered. Her heart swelled with humility and pride, not for recognition but for knowing that a small act had sparked something profound. She discovered that wealth in his case had not changed him. It had merely given him a broader platform to extend his compassion. What mattered more than resources was intention, understanding, and respect for the people one was trying to help. She reflected on her own life and realized that she too could make a difference in her own small ways, in her own community, every day. The lesson was clear. Kindness was the most powerful currency, far beyond money, influence, or status. Their work together deepened the bond between them. He shared stories of people he had met, the lives that had shifted because someone had shown care, and the moments when he had felt truly connected to humanity. She shared her thoughts, her observations, and her hopes for a world where empathy could prevail over indifference. There was a quiet understanding between them that this was not about recognition, fame, or acknowledgement. It was about creating impact, about touching lives with sincerity and commitment. One day, as they walked through a community center they had helped renovate, a young boy approached them with a shy smile. He held a handmade card, offering it to her with both hands. She opened it carefully and read the simple words, "Thank you for helping us." The boy looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, and in that moment, she felt the weight of all their efforts. The act of kindness she had shown to a stranger had now created a ripple that reached far beyond what she could see. She felt tears welling up, not from sadness but from the realization of the profound impact that human connection and compassion could have. The man noticed her emotion and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "This is what it's about," he said softly. "It's not the wealth, the fame, or the recognition. It's moments like this where lives are touched in ways that matter. You reminded me of that night in the garage, and now we are seeing the ripple together." She nodded, understanding fully. It was a lesson she would carry forever, that even one night, one act of kindness could transform perspectives, inspire actions, and touch lives in ways unimaginable. Their collaboration became more than just philanthropy. It became a story of shared humanity, of how empathy could connect strangers, and how simple choices could lead to profound changes. Months passed, and she continued to work alongside him, organizing initiatives, visiting communities, and lending her perspective to projects that required both thoughtfulness and heart. She felt fulfilled in ways she had never anticipated. Life felt richer, not because of material gain or recognition, but because she had discovered the power of meaningful action, of connection, and of the subtle ways kindness could change the world. Occasionally, they would pause during their work to reflect, to sit quietly, and to share moments of simple human connection. He would speak about the lessons he had learned from their first encounter, about how seeing genuine kindness had reaffirmed his belief in humanity. She would share her thoughts on the lives they had touched, the communities they had strengthened, and the hope that had been restored in people who had once felt forgotten. Through it all, she realized that her life had been transformed, not just by his wealth or influence, but by the way he approached life with humility, compassion, and thoughtfulness. The man she had sheltered for one night had become a teacher, a partner, and a reminder that human connection was the true measure of life's value. Their story spread quietly, not as a tale of wealth or fame, but as an example of how simple acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing perspectives, inspiring action, and reminding people of the humanity that connected them all. She felt a quiet pride not in herself, but in knowing that the world could be a better place one act at a time, and that the lessons of one night in a garage had blossomed into something extraordinary. In the end, she understood that the true reward was not the opportunities, the experiences, or even the recognition that came with their work. The real reward was knowing that a small gesture, offered without expectation, had created a chain of kindness and understanding that would continue to grow. And that, she realized, was more valuable than anything money could buy, more lasting than any material possession.